So if you haven't used Zoom before, just some very basic Zoom settings to be aware of: the mute button, the video button. We're going to ask folks to stay on mute for most of this presentation. There'll be a couple places for people to chime in, but because we have around, looks like close to 20 people on now, having too many people talking at the same time can get really, really messy. But feel free to use the chat feature as much as you like. Emma will be monitoring the chat, like I said, and if there are any questions that she doesn't know the answer to, she'll mention to me, or we'll circle back to you. And then I assume your screen looks something like this. I encourage folks to rename themselves. You can add your pronouns and your location if you choose, but looks like a lot of folks have already done that, which is excellent. We can jump right ahead. So just in case we do have some kind of disruption today, I don't think this will be the case, but just in case it does, I want to give people a heads up. If we have someone who starts yelling or doing something else weird, we'll shut down the presentation for a few minutes and show this picture of puppies while we sort out whatever was going on. If we have to kick someone out, we will do that. And then when the image is gone, it means we're ready to resume. If that happens, and the very unlikely event that does happen, feel free to turn off your volume or walk away from your computer for a minute and come back. We really don't anticipate this will be the case, but just in the very off chance that it is, I want to give folks a heads up. So, all right, welcome. Thanks for joining today's climate advocacy workshop. I'm gonna have a lot to fit in the next hour and 25 minutes. I'm gonna try and hold to that time. But if we could start off by just, if folks want to type in the chat and say hello, I'd love to hear where folks are calling in from. And if they have any bit of positivity to share in the chat, it'd be great to see some of that. So why don't folks type their name in the chat? It'll be good practice for some of our breakout activities coming up in the next, I don't know, hour or so. Wow, awesome. Hi, Sarah, it's great to see you. Kelsey, you're calling from Somerville. I'm not far away, also in Somerville. Tara, it's nice to see you again. I hope everything's going well with you. Other folks from Somerville, I love that. Sarah from Copenhagen, nice to have you on the call again. Folks from Shrewsbury, from Northampton. Hey, Steve. Hey, Paul. I know I'm not capturing everybody here. It's really great. It's nice to see our movement all across Massachusetts and beyond Massachusetts, not just in the Boston area. I love that. All right, we're gonna jump right in. So I'm gonna have a quick overview of Sierra Club before we get into the meat of our presentation. I assume most folks are at least generally aware of the organization. We are a national environmental organization with a mission of explore, enjoying, and protecting our planet. Unfortunately, we've done a lot more protecting than exploring and enjoying these last few years, but that is our mission. We're founded over 100 years ago, and we spread across the country, 64 chapters, at least one in every state. California has a lot, and almost 4 million members and supporters nationally. In Massachusetts, we have a large supporter base here, about 130,000 people, and a very small staff. There are just 6 of us or 7 of us now who are Massachusetts staff members, so we really rely on our volunteers, our interns, and other leaders to do the important work to protect the planet, stop climate change, lower emissions, make a cleaner, healthier world. So just a very brief overview today of what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to do a little bit of Climate 101, which is always fun, go over some of the Massachusetts climate laws, just at a very basic level so folks are on the same page. I'm going to talk about some of our campaign goals for the day, and also some of our opportunities to make change and why it's not happening already. And then I'm going to close with some next steps. I picked some next steps for today that folks can do like now, like, before 2 o'clock. There'll be other next steps available in our follow-up email we send out either sometime between today and Monday, whenever I get a spare moment, or folks can plug in and get involved in organizing. So don't think the next steps I'm sharing at the end of the presentation are everything we're doing, because they're not. And I also just want to name that what this presentation isn't is we're not going to spend time talking about legislation today or about elections. Those are very important things to our work, but for several reasons, mostly time, we've chosen not to include them in our presentation. The goals we're talking about certainly have corresponding legislative goals, and I'm happy to have a separate conversation about lobbying or about election work, but I'm not going to be able to go through either of those today. All right, so moving right ahead. And Emma, feel free to jump in if there's a question in the chat or something that I'm missing. But I'll jump in ahead.
Sure. Jacob, we have one request for you to speak a little louder if that's possible. I don't know if you have a mic nearby.
I don't get that very often. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to adjust something over here.
Great, thanks.
I shut the door so I can really yell. All right, so Climate Crisis 101. Hopefully this helps a little bit. So the climate crisis caused by the greenhouse gas effect. I was first introduced to this when I watched Inconvenient Truth in 2008. It's the same principle. The sun pours out radiation. Some of it is reflected back into outer space, but most of it is absorbed by the Earth. It heats the planet. It's what makes life possible. It's the reason that it's warm out, well, warmish out today in Massachusetts. Unfortunately, we are doing too good a job absorbing radiation, and the planet's becoming too warm. Folks will note the scary graphs on the left. The trend lines are clear. Both our historic CO2 levels and global temperatures are higher than they've ever been in history. And both of these cut off before 2000. They're both from like 2015, 2013, but the trend line continues. You can trust me on that one. 18 of the hottest years of record have been the last 19 years. And this is mostly the result of burning fossil fuels. This is a man-made effect and one that we have a responsibility to reverse. I'm doubting that we have any climate deniers on the phone today, but hopefully this will convince you. And then what does this look like in Massachusetts? So we've already seen some severe weather, although the last couple winters have been, the last winter has been not terrible weather-wise. In 2018, we saw some really big storms, and these are things caused by a confluence of several factors: high tides, heavy rainstorm during a time when snow was also melting from a previous storm. And the two on the left are from the same storm. All those factors combined led to down power lines, flooding in Situate where there had never been recorded flooding before, flooding in Boston in January. That's the Aquarium T-stop for folks who are familiar with the area. And someone will always point out and say, well, you can't prove that these are caused by climate change. And that's true. There's no way to prove that scientifically. But we know that impacts like this will become increasingly common the closer we get to mid-century, unless we do something about it. All right, here's our first quiz. We're going to practice some stuff I've never done before, so you all are guinea pigs. We're going to do a little pop quiz here. See here. The folks can tell me how many years since Massachusetts legislature passed substantial climate legislation. So not like a little tweak, but like something meaty. And I'm going to launch a poll. It should appear on your screen. Folks want to give it your best guess. I can't see who puts what, so it's anonymous. Seeing some answers. I love this. It's actually amazing seeing this real time. I wish you could share this experience with me on my end. Anyone else? I'll give it another 5 seconds here. I'm going to type in the response. Love that. All right. I'm going to close it out, and I'm going to share the results. I hope you all can see this. Variety of responses, but the correct answer was what most people said, 11 to 15 years. It was actually 12 years ago that we passed the Global Warming Solutions Act in 2008. That was the last substantial piece of climate legislation. We did pass some smaller bills since then, things around solar or the renewable portfolio standard, which have helped move the ball in the right direction, but haven't overhauled our clean energy or climate policy in Massachusetts. All right. Thank you all. That was a lot of fun for me. I hope for you as well. So here are the laws I was talking about. You notice these are all from the last decade, or 2 decades ago, actually. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about these laws in detail. There's plenty of information online. But the Global Warming Solutions Act, that second bullet point, is I think the really important one to know. This was a huge piece of legislation in 2008 that set our emissions targets for both this year and for 2050. So basically what this says is Massachusetts is requiring the state to reduce our total emissions. So that's emissions produced from transportation, from energy, from heating and cooling of buildings by 25% under the 1990 levels. They picked 1990 as the benchmark. They said by this year, by 2020, we have to get our emissions 25% lower than they were in 1990. And in 2050, we want those emissions to be reduced by 80%. When this was released, when this was passed in 2008, this was a huge piece of legislation and made quite an impact nationally. Someone always asks me the question, have we gotten to the 2020 goal? And the answer is, I don't know. We won't know for a couple of years because of how emissions are tracked. And I think depending on who you ask today, you'll get a different answer. The state certainly says we're right on track. Other advocates say not so much. It's very tricky to count emissions. And you'll notice there's no targets for 2030 and 2040. It's a big leap from 2020 to 2050. And folks who are paying really close attention might have seen on Earth Day, the Governor Baker actually updated our 2050 target, which is a big deal. But he only updated it from 80% to 85%, which is not really the kind of leadership that at Sierra Club we're looking for. We believe we want to have a zero emission target by 2050. So then the Green Communities Act, which was also released in 2008, was the other piece of legislation that was supposed to help get us to the Global Warming Solutions Act. Sorry, get us to those 2020 targets. So the Green Communities Act launched the Green Communities Program, which I'm sure many folks have heard of. Most towns are, quote, green community, which means they get grant money from the state to do energy efficiency projects or put up solar panels, electric vehicle chargers. It's been a hugely successful program, and it's why Massachusetts has some of the best energy efficiency in the country. And lastly, at the bottom, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, as a cap and trade program. This was planned since before 2008, and one of the reasons that this all happened at the same time, it was all very intentional. RGGI helps fund the Green Communities Act. Money from the RGGI program, from the cap and trade program, goes to energy efficiency, not just in Massachusetts, but all across the Northeast. So taken as a whole, this was a huge step in the right direction, 2008. Since then, we really haven't seen anything even approaching this scale, even though we're in desperate need. All right, so that is, I think, the end of Massachusetts laws and policies. We're going to move on talking about our emissions and our energy use. So these are some complicated graphs. Don't worry about trying to totally internalize. I'll send out these slides in the follow-up email, so everyone who registered will get the slide deck as well. But basically, you can see what our emissions have been over the last 30 years. And folks notice that transportation is leading the pack. It was projected in 2010. I think these projections happened actually in 2008 when the Global Warming Solutions Act was passed. So they projected transportation would go up considerably. It's gone down a little bit. But the only real change in my mind is our electricity consumption has gone down a lot. So buildings, which are the green and red bars, are about kind of what they're projected. Transportation's gone down a little bit. Energy consumption's gone down a lot. We are consuming a lot less electricity than we were in 2008, which is kind of mind-blowing. And mostly that's because of energy efficiency projects. So here's my second quiz. And if I'm wrong on this, I forgot to do the double check. I can't remember if this is the 2018 or 2020 number. So I'm counting on you all to correct me if I'm wrong. What percentage of electricity comes from renewable sources? I'm going to launch a poll. Folks can type in what they think. Seeing a lot of responses very quickly. It's very, very, very fun to do this. I can't even tell you. All right, I'll give it another few seconds. Folks are thinking, doing the math. All right. So I may have tripped myself up here, and someone please tell me if that's the case. I believe the number now for electricity is 14%. And that's based on the renewable portfolio standard. Now, it goes up 2% each year, and I think that's this year, but if I'm stuck in 2019, someone please tell me. But either way, it is not as much as we'd like, to say the least. And this is where our electricity that turns on our light bulbs comes from. Thanks, folks, for playing. So, and this is kind of a historical look at that same number. This is actually this is a little different. This is where our electricity is generated, which is slightly different than our usage. But you know, it's a similar idea. So you can see historically, natural gas has been just a huge fuel for Massachusetts. I don't actually like calling it natural gas. My preferred term is fracked gas because it comes from fracking in states like Pennsylvania. Natural makes it sound like not a fossil fuel. It absolutely is a fossil fuel, and burning it produces greenhouse gases. We don't support gas, fracked gas, natural gas, whatever your preferred term is. Coal historically has been part of our energy load. It should be down to pretty much zero now because we closed our last coal plant in Massachusetts in 2017 or 2018. Nuclear, same deal. The Pilgrim nuclear power plant is no longer operational. We're not producing nuclear power in Massachusetts. Petroleum hasn't been part of our energy mix for a while, but that's like, you know, what you burn in your car. Not very efficient for powering our electricity. Very dirty as well. And you'll see solar is 7% here. That was 3 years ago. It's probably a little higher now. I'm not quite sure what the number is, maybe closer to 9 or 10, I'd hope, but not substantially different. And the tiny blue bar at the bottom is wind, which is probably about the same. We're hoping to build quite a bit of offshore wind in a few years, which would really increase that blue bar, but right now it's stayed very low. And natural gas is probably bigger. It's probably more than 66% now as coal and nuclear have gone down. That's mostly what's making up the difference. And this is actually a kind of a similar graph from 2012 to 2016 on heating, which, you know, you think about electricity as different than heating. Electricity, what's powering my computer right now and letting me talk to you. Heating is what's keeping me from being cold at night. Most heating sources are also gas. I have a gas boiler in the apartment that I'm in. A lot of folks probably have a gas stove at home, I'd expect. And you'll also see that electricity makes up a nice portion of this, which is what we want to see. That would be like an electric space heater, or what do you call it? In-floor heating sometimes can be electric. Electric heating is really good, or if you have a heat pump in your house, that's the new modern technology that works great. Fuel oil is a little over a quarter. Hopefully that's numbers going down a little bit. Those are those old oil furnaces. Hopefully those are good for about 20 years, and hopefully now that folks who installed one 20 years ago need to replace them, they're replacing it with electric heat. And obviously wood and other sources make up a small percentage as well. All right, so I think this is the one piece of information that I want to get across to everybody. If you take anything away from this presentation, let it be this. And I would even take the word technological out of this. We have the solutions to this crisis. What we don't have is the political will. So we have all of the right technology, we have all the tools we need to reduce our emissions and stop climate change. What we're missing is the willpower to make it happen. So I'm going to do a brainstorm, and you don't need to chat it out. We're going to do a little activity here, which is going to be a new one. Emma, do you mind dropping in the slideshow into the chat now? So what we're going to do here is I'm going to let folks, we're going to share this PowerPoint with you all through the chat. So you can copy the link that Emma puts in the chat into your browser. I'll wait for her to do that for a second. Yep. So copy the link that Emma just shared into your browser and turn to slide 19.
19.
Yep. Turn to slide 19. And as you edit on your own screen, the things will appear here, and we can fill up this slide together. This is gonna be a little experiment. I haven't run this activity before. You all are guinea pigs. I'm gonna let folks take a minute to open that up, turn to slide 19, and type stuff in. I'm wondering if we need to share the slideshow with, make it edit privileges for everybody.
I did that, yeah. Everybody should be able to edit.
All right, I'm gonna wait a second and let folks see what they can do. Still saying we need permission.
Wait, and it also says I need permission. Okay, wait. Anyone?
Thanks all. So this is the first time we've done this activity before, so we are working at the kinks.
Sorry about that. We had it set for anybody at Sierra Club.
Right.
All right, let's try that again. And Jacob, while folks are getting settled, we had a question in the chat. The slide for sources of electricity doesn't look like 14% renewable, solar at 7%, and others minuscule. Do you know where does the 14% come from?
Oh yeah. Let me bring that back up again, and I know exactly the answer to that question. 1 second. In the meantime, I see some folks are starting to get into the doc, which is great. I see about 15 people in there. I took down my sharing for a second to make sure that that was working out. All right, so while folks are doing that, the question was about the difference between the 14% of what's on this graph. Basically, the difference is between where electricity comes from and how it's being used. The 14% is how it's being used, which includes sources from out of state. That graph only shows what's being produced in Massachusetts. So we also use power from New Hampshire and New York and other places, or not New York, and Connecticut, because we're on a regional grid. That graph just shows what Massachusetts is generating. But basically, the renewable sources we're talking about are solar, wind, a little bit of hydroelectric, and what's it called? Anaerobic digestion make up the 14%. And I'm seeing folks are continuing to type in to slide 19, which is great. Does anyone else want to type in a few things? You can give more than one answer if you have more than one.
Jacob, you might need to stop stop presenting
Sure.
in order for the presentation on Zoom to update. It looks like it's captured in time.
Oh, great to know. This is why we're doing this. Oh yeah, this is awesome.
I think if you share your screen but don't go into present mode on the slide deck, yeah,
Yep.
there you go.
Thank you. These are great. I'm just going to shout out a few of these. Car sharing is that's one I haven't seen before. I think getting cars off the road is key. Carbon capture, reducing building energy use. I see someone starting to type in batteries. These are great. I think what I'd emphasize is what we look for at Sierra Club is broad policy change, not so much individual change. So if folks want to make change in their own lives, that's great. I certainly do think that I believe in, but we want to create policies that make it as easy as possible for people to participate in all these things. It's okay though, you don't have to delete if you think it doesn't fall into the category. This is just a brainstorm. All right, I think we're gonna move on from this. This was really awesome, y'all. So when I share this presentation out in the email, you'll have access to all these ideas. I love this. So I'm gonna move us along to slide 20. And slide 20 is this is what happens if we manage to have all of those policies rolled out fully by 2050. This is one possible future, and it's a pretty good one. So you can see this dotted line here above 2020 is roughly where we are now, although the percentages are like a little different. And you can see that most of our energy is coming from fossil fuels, biofuels, nuclear. Biofuels usually means wood burning in Massachusetts, which we're not a big fan of. Wood burning for power is not great. And as we get closer to 2050, we scale up solar and wind, especially offshore wind. This number could be even bigger than 55%. We have an enormous offshore wind potential in Massachusetts. And you'll also notice that our energy consumption is going down. So we're hoping to use less power in 2050 than we're using today. As a matter of fact, we need to be. A lot of that comes from just energy efficiency projects, insulating homes, LED lights, very basic things. We also lose a lot of heat due to combustion, and fossil fuels are ostensibly combustion engines. So by moving away from that, we're able to save a lot of power just right at the beginning. I love this slide. And then just a few more things. This is actually, I think, a wind turbine off of Rhode Island. The ones we're hoping to build in Massachusetts are even bigger than this. I learned a fact recently that it actually only takes a single day to erect a turbine out at sea. So they bring them out there fully built, obviously, and they have them in the ocean in one day, essentially sitting on the ocean floor. Just crazy to me. But the costs to build clean energy are plummeting, lower than they've ever been. It creates stabilization for long-term energy prices. You think about how gas is fluctuating wildly right now. The oil market is out of control. Not so much with clean energy. Once it's built. There's no cost for fuel. There's no danger for spills or emissions. Building renewable generation like wind and solar creates good jobs here in Massachusetts. And there's the investment that comes along with that. Right now, we buy so much power from out of state. If we're buying our power locally here in Massachusetts, that's going to keep our dollars here to support our state economy. We actually see Maine has done a pretty good job of that. They import some from Canada, but they also produce a lot of wind power locally. And then lastly, the health impacts. Clean energy almost pays for itself, if not more than, just based on the healthcare costs alone. Fumes and pollution cause millions to die each year from air pollution. That's millions globally, not millions in Massachusetts, to be clear. And then just a few other things I'm actually not going to talk about in this presentation so much. More about efficiency. Heating and cooling of buildings is very important. We need to start building our buildings to a very high standard. We want 100% electric grid. And there's a lot of pieces to that, including battery storage. Buildings, transportation, everything needs to go electric. I would love to do another presentation sometime about farming and agricultural practices, but that's not where my knowledge is so much. But there are a lot of farming practices that can be used to reduce our emissions. And then lastly, plastics. Plastics are made from fossil fuels. We really need to stop using plastics as a society, which is a very challenging, very difficult separate fight. But plastics are toxic. They stay in our environment for a long time, and they prolong our reliance on fossil fuels. So this slide is just one last little note here. Folks have asked me in the past, why do we continue to push for fossil fuels if they're unpopular, they're polluting? And the short answer is just money. We rely on fossil fuels because there's a whole industry backing it and a government structure that helps support that industry. So right now, if you are a pipeline company and you want to build a pipeline between Massachusetts and New York or something like that, you're guaranteed a 14 rate of return from the national government for that pipeline. And that's something that could be changed by a new president. This is a Trump era ruling from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And pipeline companies know this rule won't be here forever. So they're trying really hard to build pipelines now before they become stranded assets or before that beautiful rate of return goes away. And in Massachusetts, I'd say most of these pipeline projects have gotten pretty consistent support from the Baker administration. All right, I'm gonna take a little breath here. Hope that was fun. That was Climate 101. We're gonna talk about the climate movement in Massachusetts next. And we're gonna do one more of those sticky note exercises. So if folks wanna turn to slide 25, and the question here is, who's part of our movement? Who is helping us move to 100% renewable energy? Thank you, Emma, for already dropping in the link to the chat again. And you can take this whatever direction you want. So I encourage as much outside the box thinking as you feel comfortable. Let's take just a few minutes to do this.
I want to also note we had so many good responses last time that slide 26 is more sticky notes. So if you find that you're having trouble typing into a box on 25, scroll on down to 26 and there should be plenty of space for everybody.
I'm seeing some good responses here. Some organizations I know well: Environment Massachusetts, 350, Mass Climate Action Network, all awesome organizations. Organic Farmers, Children and Youth, love that. Can folks think of anyone who's not like any organizations who maybe aren't environmental organizations or groups of people who might have a stake in this? Oh yeah, I'm seeing that now. Even before I started saying that. Love it. These are really great answers.
Again, as these boxes fill up, feel free to jump down to slide 26.
I think that the main takeaway here is that truly most people are part of our movement here. There is room for almost everybody. There will always be those holdouts, people who make money off of fossil fuels, who will hold on to their dying breath onto industry that's failing. But we want to make room at the table for everybody, especially folks who haven't historically been at the table, which could be impacted communities, folks who are immigrants, or folks who don't speak English as a first language, who haven't always historically been part of our movement. I'm gonna look down at slide 26 for a second. All right, I'm gonna move this along, I think. Thank you everyone for your wonderful answers. So this is just our overall campaign vision. These are just kind of a set of principles we look for and the policies we support. So Sierra Club, we envision, and this is, I should say, this is Sierra Club's campaign vision, but it really overlaps with the vision of a lot of our allies and organizations we work with. So we envision a world powered by clean renewable energy like solar and wind, where buildings and transportation are efficient and pollution-free. People have a healthy environment, free of pollution. The people who've been historically threatened by fossil fuels are benefiting the most from the transition to renewable energy. And where communities have control over energy produced and consumed, and decision-making is local and democratic. We don't have that at all right now. Like my utility is Eversource, and I could call them or write them a letter and say, you all should provide some more renewable electricity for your consumers. They would not respond to me. So right now we have no democratic control over our energy use. That's something we hope to change in the next 10, 20, 30 years. So this brings us to our first campaign goal. We want Massachusetts to be on track to 100% renewable energy as quickly as possible. What the IPCC report, which is a UN report from 2018 said, I don't know, folks might have seen like t-shirts that say 12 years, 11 years, 10 years. This is a study that basically is what's been leading our advocacy the last couple of years. Basically, the study says we need to reduce our emissions now. We can't wait till 2050. We can't wait till mid-century. We need a substantial drop in our emissions by 2030. In Massachusetts, we're calling for a 50% reduction in emissions as early as 2030. And this is our best shot to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. We can't push off these changes until 2040, 2050. We need change now in this decade. And I share this slide to say that Massachusetts isn't the only state that's we are pushing to commit to 100% renewable energy. Washington is one of 6 states that have already committed to 100% renewables. Washington's commitment's actually by 2045 and coal-free by 2025. All these commitments are a little different. Some of them have some issues. They're not perfect, but they all are moving in the direction towards 100%. So California, Hawaii, New Mexico, Nevada passed bills in the last couple of years. Virginia is the most recent. And folks might remember Virginia flipped its state house in 2019. This was a direct result of that election. Illinois, Minnesota, New York, Massachusetts are also considering similar policies. So this is we're doing a really quick activity, and this is just a chat activity, so you can just type your answers in the chat here. But this is going to kind of frame our next campaign goal. I like folks just to look at this quote and kind of interpret it how they want. There's a lot of ways to go with this, but this is from our National Executive Director, Mike Brune. Our 2 biggest problems are climate change and income inequality. If we pit one against the other, neither will win. So I'd like folks to maybe take just like 2 minutes, think about this, and type in the chat, what do we mean by this? And what's this idea of equity or equality? Maybe we'll take until, what time is it? 12:46, give folks like a minute and a half. And if people are having trouble finding the chat, I can stop sharing. I actually should make it easier. Although no, then you'll be able to see this quote. So if folks are in full screen, the chat might be the top of the screen. You can hit escape if you're in full screen to see the features at the bottom. Seeing a couple responses. Sue, I think you messaged me privately. I think you meant to send that to everybody. Thanks, Rob. hypercapitalism is exacerbating both climate change and inequality? Yep, Sarah, thank you so much for that. I'm gonna paraphrase here. Our structures have intersectional ramifications. So sounds like the structures that control our economy and those that control our climate are intrinsically linked. Michael, thank you so much. Climate solutions should have equity as a consideration before implementation, or else marginalized communities will be left behind. And Sarah, I like what you said too. Justice must be complete. You can't get it piecemeal. And Paul, I think that yours is in the right direction. I would tweak it slightly. You said financial resources for climate change should not draw away from resources to promote equality or universal health care. We can do both. That's, I think, the way I would frame it is that it's a both and thing. We can't pit them against each other. We have to move forward with all the above. All right, thank you so much for your responses, folks. When I did this presentation live, I would have folks break out and we have a bigger conversation, but we only have so much time and it's virtual. But thank you so much for your responses. Those are some really great thoughts. So just very broadly, why equity matters. I think like the income inequality crisis, the climate, sorry, let me say that again. Like the inequality crisis, the climate crisis is one of exploitation. The people who benefit from fossil fuels and the people who benefit from our capitalist economy both do so at the cost of people who have less power or less of a say. And it's these exploitive practices that help sustain the system and stratify our society. So this is a very wordy slide, but I think the big takeaway here is we need to flip the pyramid. The people who have been exploited or who bear some of the brunt of pollution and climate change need to be at the table as part of the decision making. So our second goal here is environmental justice. Very similar to what I just said, the people who have been historically impacted by pollution and by climate change cannot continue to be impacted in the future. We need to change that. Those who live in polluted communities, we need to take special care that our policies are not adversely affecting them, and in fact, the opposite, that they're helping to clean up those neighborhoods and those communities. And then also the people who are most impacted have a say in the policy. The policy is not being given to them, because if it's just handed to them, it's not going to truly be equitable policy. Let's see here. I see little notifications in the chat. I'm not able to see everyone's response. So if I'm missing somebody or you're messaging me privately, I might not see it. So feel free to message Emma if there's something you really want answered. But we're gonna do a little, let's see here. Emma, was this the breakout one?
This is the breakout one. I don't have the breakout option on my screen right now.
Oh.
I've been trying to troubleshoot that for the last few minutes and not having much success. So you might need to set that up.
Okay. Then let's maybe just do this as a chat activity instead. And also I'm like noticing we're like 5 minutes back, like a little behind, so that might save a little time. So folks want to do one more chat activity. I think this is the only other one we have here. And just kind of reflect on where you live right now in Massachusetts, or if you're not in Massachusetts, somewhere else. What are the impacted sites in your area? Are there polluted areas nearby you? Who are the people who live there? Are they, blue collar workers? Are they immigrants? Do they look like you? Do they not look like you? And what are the other issues in your community in terms of land, housing, transportation, or other things, education, other important issues? So let's just take a couple minutes to do this. And I'm going to read off a few answers. And if I skip you, it's not because I didn't like your answer. It's just because I'm skipping around. So don't take it personally. Oops, sorry about that. I don't know how we got so far over there. Yeah, I'm sorry, Steve. It seems like the breakout thing is not working on my end either. It was working on our practice session, but we'll figure it out for next time. Paul, yeah, the wheelbarrow trash burner has a huge impact. Folks live nearby that. And Jay, thank you for mentioning Chelsea. Chelsea has been struggling a lot, it seems, recently with the COVID outbreak. Big immigrant population there, a lot of Spanish speakers, a lot of working class, low income folks. And if folks could say where, like, it'd be helpful if they said like where you live, or either the town or what type of community. But Sally, coastal residents, flooding impacts. We saw that in the slide, the picture of Situate. And David and JP, there's a lot of development, raising rent prices, especially for people of color and immigrants. Yep. Cambridge, same thing, rent going up. That's okay, Kelsey. If you want to share anything from New Orleans, that would be totally fine too. So Sarah says, lives in Alston, primarily students, immigrants, cost of living, especially housing, is going up astronomically. David asking $1 million question here. How to get some of the gentrification, how to get some of the benefits of gentrification to everybody. I think I would use a different word other than gentrification. I think gentrification intrinsically leaves people out. I think the word you're looking for is probably just how do you get urban benefits to everybody? And that definitely is the $1 million question. Thanks, Dave. Springfield, we're going to talk about that in a second. Many people struggle with housing costs, poor housing quality, landlords who are not in the community, not enough jobs in Western Mass, definitely. And I would also mention for Springfield, there is not great public transportation. You can't live in Springfield and work in Boston very easily unless you want to drive across the state every day. Yep, Sue making a good point about segregation. Boston actually is quite a segregated community. And Rob from Essex, shipbuilding industry toxins, looks until mid last century. Toxic waste, lack of affordable multi-unit housing, and the combination of elderly locals and younger professional class commuters, and some public transportation. Definitely in Massachusetts, there is a public transit disparity. Folks who live close to Boston, you have good to pretty good public transit. A lot of us take the T for granted, but there is no east-west rail to Springfield, very limited public transit options south of Boston as well. These are really good answers. Thank folks. I'm sorry we didn't do the breakout. I'm not seeing the option on my screen either, so I'm wondering if the share screen is interfering with it somehow now. But we will have that figured out for next time we run this presentation. So Springfield, this I'd like to give as an example of environmental injustice in Massachusetts. I think that there's a lot of sites we could pick around Massachusetts. This is just one of them that really exemplifies some of the problems we're trying to solve. Springfield has some of the highest asthma rates in the country. And that's partially because of its proximity to major highways, the fact that it's an urban center in itself, and because of where it is in the jet stream. Pollution from the Midwest comes into New England and settles in the Pioneer Valley area. And this is a city where 34% of residents live in poverty. 23% of residents don't own a car. It's home to a lot of low-income communities, communities of color, a lot of folks who don't speak English as a first language or have very limited English capacity at all. I talked about public transit already. One of the issues that they're starting with here is a proposed biomass plant. I'm sure there's someone on the call who could speak more about this. And if we were in person, I would make that happen. But a biomass plant is essentially a wood-burning plant that's been proposed for years in East Springfield. It's been a prolonged fight for residents and activists. Wood burning is highly polluting. The pollutants are worse than coal. I think because such fine smoke and irritants, it can go through many, many filters. And the question I often ask is, why is this proposed for East Springfield? Why not somewhere else? Why not Waltham? Why not Marshfield or something like that? And I think that the same things that are the reason the city is struggling are the same reason this makes this appealing for a company that wants to make a profit off of a large plant here. If you think it through, the first step to getting permits for something like this is holding public hearings, getting community buy-in. These hearings are often held during the day. They're held all in English with limited promotion. If you are someone who works a job or have kids at home or you don't speak English, it's very, very hard for you to participate in a meaningful way. Certainly, this is a lot cheaper land than closer to Boston. I think I saw someone type that in the chat. Also, you think about the type of people who live in a wealthy suburb. If this was proposed for Newton or Weston, I've gotten laughs when I've mentioned that before. They're wealthy white professionals who would hire lawyers and fight it tooth and nail with deep bank accounts. That is just not something that exists to the same extent in Western Massachusetts and many places across the state and the country. So this is what we're trying to flip, is make sure these communities have a voice to prevent projects like this and a seat at the table. And I'm just going to read quickly the quote from Tanisha Arena, who I believe is the former ED now for Arise. I haven't updated this slide in a while. But she says, to continue to push to force the biomass plant placement in a community of Black and brown people is blatant environmental racism. Oops, I skipped ahead by accident. I think this is just a prime example. Folks have also brought up the site in Weymouth, which I'll talk about a little later as another example. So the last goal kind of ties the first two together in this idea of equitable investment. I'm not talking about like divestment from fossil fuels. Sometimes that's confusing, but how do we invest in our green infrastructure? How do we build wind and solar energy efficiency projects without basically taxing folks who are trying to benefit? You know, a regressive tax is not the solution to the climate crisis. So there is no right answer here. Sierra Club doesn't pretend to have all the answers. In fact, probably a mix of several solutions is what is going to be best. But essentially, we know where we need to raise money. It will likely be through some form of tax revenue and other streams as well. But the way that we govern this country is by raising money through taxes. The gas tax is what's being talked about a lot right now. We are The Sierra Club has mixed feelings with a gas tax. I think a small gas tax could have some possible benefits, but a gas tax is inherently regressive, meaning that people who are driving a lot for work, who are often lower income, are going to be paying more in taxes than people who are wealthier or who live closer to Boston, who have a larger income, and a gas tax would be a much, much smaller percentage of their income. So we need to really be careful and think about, when we're taxing people, are we taxing wealthy corporations, or are we taxing already low-income communities? And I would strongly recommend taxing the wealthy corporations and high-income earners. So I'm going to skip to this next section. I cut a bunch of it out for the Zoom version. So I'm happy to talk more about this, the barriers to progress as well. This is like my favorite section normally to present. There are a lot of reasons we're not making progress right now. And I think this is our second to last activity here. We're gonna do one more of these with the sticky notes. And that is slide 39. So Emma, you don't mind dumping the link in the chat one more time? The question is, and you can look ahead in the slides if you want to cheat, but what might be some barriers to achieving 100% renewable energy in Massachusetts? Or it could be barriers for any kind of climate policy. It could be a barrier for environmental justice. I just chose the 100% renewables as a random example. Why are we not seeing progress despite the urgency of the issue? And don't put things like technology, like because we don't have cold fusion. I don't want to see that, because folks, remember, we have the technological solutions. So what are some other barriers? I'm going to zoom out of this. Yep, I am seeing some good answers already. Let's just take like 2 minutes and do this.
And again, there's another slide. If you run out of sticky notes, you can go on down to slide 40 for more space.
I'm catching my breath here, but I'm seeing good things. Trump, I don't talk about Trump barely at all in this presentation, but if we want to see the China change we need, we're going to need a new president at some point. Scientist voice suppressed. Yep, I'd link that right with what I said before. In Massachusetts, we have a lot of conservative and moderate Democratic legislators who aren't totally helpful. The person who wrote evangelicals, I see what you mean by that. I don't think that people's religious beliefs are inherently a barrier, but I would say that maybe the right wing as a whole and their distrust for science is a problem. There's certainly we have a lot of religious allies in our fight to save the climate. Fossil fuel companies, took me a second to realize what FF meant. That's huge. People who make money off of fossil fuels don't want to give it up. Complacency. So the person who wrote that is getting a very small award. That is huge. And not just complacency among people, but complacency among legislators, among leaders, people who have the power to make change. A lack of transparency and visibility in the legislature, absolutely. I mean, when I do these presentations, I often do a hand raise, like who knows the name of their legislator? Who knows the last thing they voted on? It's very hard to know in Massachusetts. We have a very untransparent government. Someone wrote COVID-19 recovery taking priority. I think in the short term that there's some truth to that, but I think we also have an opportunity for a green recovery. And in fact, that could be a hugely beneficial option. So while our economy is kind of stagnating now, we could use rapid rollout of green technology as a way to stimulate our economy and create jobs immediately. So I think there's also an opportunity there that goes along with it. as NIMBY attitudes of residents. Yep, I think that we're in a housing crisis as well, and that is intrinsically linked to the climate crisis. We need to make sure that people have homes, especially homes where they are powered by electricity. That's great, not just for the environment, but also having highly efficient electric heating and cooling can lower people's heating bills, electric bills tremendously. It's great for affordable housing. Looks like we've pretty much filled this up, just great. Hope folks aren't getting too sick of hearing me speak. We're in the last little bit here. Yep, and I'm noticing in the chat too a few other things, apathy, and Rob, your comment about trying to get a wind turbine and CPA bylaws passed took a long time in the town. I think you're right, the legislative process is not accessible, even at the, maybe especially at the local level. And then Sue, I think that, yeah, not making the connection between the immediate consequences of inaction versus what change can look like now. These are all great thoughts. Did folks want to maybe give like a thumbs up or something? That people have been enjoying the sticky note activities. Is that working for folks? Seeing a couple reactions. Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. Like I said, we've not done these before, so we're experimenting today. All right. All right. A few other here. Oh, yep. Activism against land-based wind turbines. We saw that a lot in the Cape. Lack of funding. Yep, definitely true. And I also, with lack of funding, I would say lack of prioritization. I'm seeing a few people couldn't type in onto the slideshow. Always feel free to type in the chat if your comment didn't make it in there. But instead of lack of funding, yeah, lack of prioritization. We have money. There is a lot of revenue available in Massachusetts. We have some very big corporations who could pay more taxes. We have millionaires who could pay their fair share. But it's about prioritizing where we raise and spend that money. All right, home stretch here. So I like to group barriers into two types, opposing interests and then structural/democracy barriers. Opposing interests are like Exxon, the Mass Petroleum Institute. These are people who lobby against climate policies and have a stake in the fossil fuel industry. On the other hand, we have structural and democracy barriers. Like those are going to be things like apathy and a lack of transparency in the State House. And the fact that, to be honest, most of our legislators are overwhelmed. They are dealing with many, many issues, not just the climate one. There's just not a lack of urgency around these issues like there needs to be. So here's just some examples of opposing interests. This is not all the opposing interests, but I think it's a nice slice, and I'll go through it line by line. So public officials, that's obviously a big one. We have lots of opponents in the legislature. Certainly the president is one of our biggest opponents, but even Governor Baker and his administration, while they've been good on some issues and haven't been as bad as some governors, they are mostly unaligned with Sierra Club and our climate policies. Really evil sounding organizations like the Mass Petroleum Council and the American Petroleum Institute, these are like very obviously bad organizations, but they have armies of paid lobbyists and analysts, far more than what Sierra Club has, to go lobby legislators, be in the State House every day. Does anyone know the picture in the top right with Steve Dodge? He's the guy on the left. Does anyone know who the guy on the right is? Anyone from New Hampshire? Anyone? Yeah, Rob got it. Chris Sununu, the governor of New Hampshire. So it turns out if you work for the Mass Petroleum Council, you have a lot of access to policymakers. I do not have access to Governor Baker. I will tell you that right now. And I doubt that Sierra Club New Hampshire has much access to Chris Sununu. But when you show up every day and you have a lot of lobbying power, make big campaign donations, it gets you a lot of influence. So, and then I'll talk for a minute about the Associated Industries of Massachusetts. Folks probably haven't heard of this. Maybe some of you have. This is like a trade organization for big business, like really big, the biggest business there is. Like corporations like Bank of America, Harvard Pilgrim, Eversource are all part of the Associated Industries of Massachusetts. And AIM looks out for its corporations and tries to lobby for policies that help them make money. So that's not necessarily inherently an evil thing, but unfortunately, it makes them unaligned with Sierra Club on a lot of key issues, especially gas. AIM has been incredibly pro-gas and has been funding a lot of the lobbying against wind and solar because these corporations make money off of the status quo. And often, it's not like, with Harvard Pilgrim or other organizations, they might not necessarily know fully what AIM is doing. They pay dues into AIM, but they might not know what AIM is exactly lobbying for, or the people who might care about it. There might be some disconnect, and in many cases, I think that is the case. So it's up to us to, to continue to push and push these corporations in the right direction. Mass Fiscal Alliance, folks probably have heard of them. They're the ones who are they're the anti-tax corporation in Massachusetts, opposing anything that even looks like a tax, regardless of the impact or the cost. We've actually been aligned with them on some issues. If there's a bad tax, we tend to be actually on the same page with them. But when it comes to raising money for renewable energy, we're put at odds. And they come out very strongly against TCI, which is a transportation cap and trade initiative that is under consideration right now, that we have been one of the organizations discussing and advocating for a good version of TCI. Within a few weeks, they had like 10 op-eds in the Boston Herald. They can pump stuff out very quickly.
Jacob, we had a question in the chat.
Yeah.
Does the Massachusetts Sierra Club ever do outreach to teach AIM or its constituents?
Short answer is yes. Was it more of the question?
Does this have to be a conflict? Am I understanding correctly, Sue? Maybe we could find a way to educate them.
Yeah, well, I can respond and say like a little what we've done. We have reached out to AIM member organizations in the past. Unfortunately, their list of the list of organizations is very, very, very long, and the ones that kind of dictate their energy policy are organizations like Eversource, who we have like a long history of kind of being at loggerheads with. So I think that until like Eversource and National Grid and others change their energy policies, AIM is not going to change what it's doing. I think that's probably the direction to go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Governor Baker. I try really hard to give a fair portrait of Governor Baker. So he's done some things that are pretty good and a lot of things that are quite bad in regards to climate and the environment. But we'll talk about the good things first. He's been a huge supporter of offshore wind and a huge supponent of offshore drilling, which are very comfortable and easy positions to take. Those aren't stepping outside his comfort zone at all. But credit where credit's due, he did go to DC to help lobby for offshore wind in Massachusetts. He supports funding for climate resilience, which is like money for like seawalls, which is like not a great use of that money, but like things to protect communities from rising sea levels, from droughts. Could be building bridges and repairing infrastructure. Unfortunately, I'm worried that this will translate into money to protect corporations from climate change and not people, but that kind of remains to be seen. And I mentioned TCI a minute ago. He's been a supporter of TCI. His administration has been leading the region, looking for a cap and trade initiative to support transportation. We don't know what the final policy will look like yet, and given Baker's track record, we're worried again the benefits will mostly go to the communities that already are benefiting. And I mentioned that updated 2050 climate goal, jumping from 85 to 80 to 85%. Not a huge change. It's a small step in the right direction, and I think it sums up a lot of Baker's environmental legacy. He's taken baby steps in the right direction, but often it's mostly in name only. He's taken no controversial positions unless he absolutely has to. So on the bad side, I mentioned his support for fossil fuel pipelines. That's really not great. We fought his administration a lot on pipeline issues. Massachusetts actually lost solar jobs every year, except for 2019, it went up a little bit, but 2018, 2017, we've seen a lot of loss in the solar industry. And that's mostly due to onerous solar restrictions and bad regulations from his administration. He supports burning wood for energy. His administration actually is like very, very forward about this, and they were touting it quite a bit last year. For them, wood burning is renewable. They don't consider the pollution or the health impacts at all. I'm mentioning Weymouth again. There's been a huge fight in Weymouth around the construction of a gas compressor station that Baker's administration helped force in, despite the outcry of the local communities, local leaders, local politicians, even Congress, even the local congressmen have fought this. Actually, I think even Senator Markey and Senator Warren came out against it. But it's ultimately Baker's play, and he's been pushing for the compressor station this whole time. And lastly, there is an environmental justice director position in the Baker administration. It has been filled occasionally, but more unfilled than filled during his administration. It's just really clear that environmental justice is not a priority for his administration. So overall, not a great picture. I think this is him actually breaking ground for the Green Line extension in Somerville, in case anyone was wondering. All right, this is a fun one, and we'll just do a really quick, this is just a very short activity. If you know what this is, keep it to yourself. But if you've never heard of the Mass Coalition for Sustainable Energy, and you want to take a guess at what this group is, type in a quick answer in the chat. I've had folks very confused by this organization. It's like around about 2 years ago. It was quite a stir. Maybe I'll just wait for a few guesses in the chat about what this is. What is the Mass Coalition for Sustainable Energy? These are things from their website, from Twitter. Any other guesses? I see Sue threw a guess in there. Come on, y'all. Don't be afraid to be wrong. Dave says they want to build gas pipelines. Anyone else want to take a stab? It seems nice, right? Like sustainable energy. I want sustainable energy, don't you? Yeah, you all are really smart. You're catching on to them. I love that. All right. Yeah, they're basically a pipeline front. And the reason that they call themselves this is because they know it's so unpopular. They know how unpopular the position is. So they kind of cloak it with the more popular renewable energy language. And even like the color scheme here, like the green and the blue, like really is just a way to kind of trick people who are reading quickly about what their true intentions are. So this is quite a stir a couple of years ago. There are a bunch of op-eds published. These are just some little snippets here. My favorite is from this Katie Eisman op-ed. It would be more aptly called the Coalition for Gaslighting Massachusetts. And this was everywhere. This was in a lot of newsletters. They're advertising and basically saying that like coal is terrible. We need to get off of coal and find a more sustainable energy, gas, right? So they're making like the better than coal argument, which isn't completely wrong. But really what we're looking for is let's get off of coal and gas and go straight to renewables. And when folks did some digging, not surprisingly, the funding for this group comes from organizations like the Associated Industries of Massachusetts, the Canadian pipeline giant Enbridge, and other utilities like Eversource and National Grid. The website is run by the lobbying firm currently working for Enbridge as it seeks approval for its Atlantic Bridge project. So I just show this to people to say, like, the fossil fuel industries are desperate. They are, at this point, trying to trick people essentially into supporting gas because they know it's unpopular and they know the window is closing for when these industries are still be profitable. By mid-century, they're going to have stranded assets. These pipelines are going to be sitting empty, and this fossil fuel infrastructure won't be able to get funded anymore. So they're trying to go as much as they can now and make the money now before they don't have an opportunity anymore. All right, I'm going to skip ahead just so we can finish right at, no, actually, we might be good here. I have 10 minutes left. I could talk for hours about this, and if you want more, you could check out Act on Mass's website. They're a transparency organization, actonmass.org, I think, or you can Google them. But basically, Massachusetts has some really bad transparency issues. And it's been a huge barrier for progress for not just Sierra Club, but people working across the issue spectrum on education, immigration, healthcare. We are 40th in the nation for public access to information. That's like mind-blowing for me. There's like states that I assume will be way lower than us that are not. And it's just, at this point, it's become a norm in our legislature and our government, some of these issues. We see legislative accountability. We are 17th. It's very difficult to know what our legislators are doing. As someone who is a lobbyist, and I can tell you firsthand, our lobbying disclosure system is terrible. We're 30th in the nation. It's completely opaque and terribly run. I have very strong feelings about our lobbying disclosure system, and I'm happy to talk this through at another time. And then this is might seem like an obvious one, but if you're a legislator, you're really busy. You know, all these folks aren't much more qualified for the job than me or you. And they do it because they want to make a difference, or because they want to put their stamp on the world, or for whatever the reason is. It's really hard to learn all the issues you need to know to be an effective legislator. Criminal justice, healthcare, immigration, reproductive rights, just to name a few. Where does climate fit into that mix? You can't be an expert on everything. So how do you make sure you have the right information at the right time? That's what's up to us as activists, to make sure our elected leaders have the information at the right time to make good policy. And then just a few other things, and you can go look on the Act on Mass website if you really want to see the horror show. But just a few tidbits. For example, there's no open meeting law for the legislature. If you're on a local board or commission, like if you're on school committee or something like that, you have to have an open meeting, post minutes, agenda in advance. That does not exist for the state legislature. They can hold committee votes behind closed doors and never reveal the results of those votes. Like voting on bills, and we'll see what happens, like the bill will get killed or passed, but we don't know who voted for what. Absolutely mind-blowing. It makes it very hard to hold our leaders accountable because we don't know how they vote half the time. Additionally, the structure in the state house is very centralized. If you're the Speaker of the House, you control committee assignments, you control even your members' paychecks. People in leadership can make almost double what their normal salary is, and who is in those positions is set entirely by the Speaker of the House. So if you're thinking about doing something to piss off the Speaker, you also be thinking, I could lose my leadership and then that would cost me $30,000 a year. That would make me think twice. You know, that's a lot of money. The system encourages incremental change, even though we know we need bold policy outcomes. So they like to do things by what's called consensus approach, which basically means baby steps and only what the Speaker wants. I have some strong feelings here too. Are there any questions in the chat, Emma, that I'm missing?
No questions, a few good links and comments for folks to look back at.
All right, thank you. Yeah, this is an area that I'm clearly very upset and maybe we could use the word passionate about.
We do have a question now. How can we change this?
That's a great question. I think that I would actually say I'm not going to talk about that today because that's a whole separate conversation. But go check out Act on Mass's website. We work with them very closely. They have some really good ideas about how to change the structure of the State House. And Emma, if you want to make sure I have the email, the web address right and drop it in the chat, I would say go for it.
Yep, I've put it in a few times.
You're the best. All right, we're coming to the end here with 5 minutes left. I've almost talked myself hoarse. I'm really, really amazed by all the folks who stay on the call here. Hopefully this has been interesting and fun, and I will stay on for a few minutes after 1:30 if there are some questions, and we'll have a little discussion. But I want to show 3 really quick options for taking action, and these are quick actions. I encourage everyone to join we have Sierra Club has regular Wednesday meetings at 1 o'clock and at 5 o'clock that are open to whoever wants to join. So if you want to plug into our campaigns in a deeper way, please join us on Wednesdays. I'll send that information in a follow-up email. But that really is where we do a lot of our organizing. The actions I'm going to share today are quick. They could take between 5 minutes and 45 minutes. And the goal is that everyone does at least one thing today to make the world a little better or advocate for something they care about. And if you want to take an action that's not in my list, but you know is a good action to take, go for it. I won't say no to you. So I'm going to introduce 3 quick actions. The first one is writing a letter to the editor. I've talked a few times about how Baker Baker on Wednesday released his 2050 target. It was just a slight improvement. We want to send some letters to local papers that say, this isn't good enough. So if you want to send an article to, if you're in Somerville, Somerville Times or Wicked Local or Mass Live in Western Mass, the Telegram Gazette in Worcester, Cape Cod Times, wherever you are, letters to the editor are a quick and easy way to do that. Usually they're only about 250 to 200 words, so it's not a long piece, just quick and to the point. I am very, discouraged to see Baker's announcement. We need 0 emissions as soon as possible. And I'll send this out in the email as well. If you don't get to do this today, send it next week. These make a huge difference, and I can tell you for a fact that your local leader will read your letter. They read the local papers.
Jacob, we have another question. What is a reasonable emissions goal? Is it 50% by 2025? What does that look like?
Ooh, great question. I believe what we asked for is 50% by 2030. I will double check what Sierra Club's exact position is and send that out, but I think that's what we've been saying. We've also said things like 100% renewable electricity by 2030. So like not transportation, not buildings, but just our electric sector by 2030. But I'll send those out so folks can have something to look at. I think the other piece is like, we need to be at 0 emissions or negative emissions by 2050. We need to be recapturing carbon in the atmosphere by 2050. All right, so here's a really quick one you can do. This is great for folks on social media. If you're on Twitter, there's a Twitter option here. But in Weymouth, as I mentioned in the past, they're pushing a gas compressor station. The local folks are trying to shut down construction, which is still going despite the pandemic. So there's a petition here to Governor Baker to ask him to shut down construction during the pandemic. And you can also tweet online targeting Governor Baker and share this with your friends to get more support. We're also going to share the folks who signed this petition. We're going to share more information about how to get plugged in locally if you want to support the folks in Weymouth in a more meaningful way. Be that with a donation, volunteer time, or what have you. The folks on the ground there have been working really, really hard for years and been fighting uphill battle this whole time. So we just want to show them solidarity and support. Yeah. And moving on, I was waiting to see if there were any questions. It sounds like Emma's doing a great job answering in the chat. Folks have also, I didn't talk about this all during the presentation, but there have been also some really big national, I don't know what we call this, ball dropping moments. Trump has rolled back a bunch of environmental standards during COVID, just using the pandemic as an excuse to cover up things that his administration wanted to do for years anyway. So the EPA has stopped enforcing corporate pollution, which is just like freaking crazy. And he's also rolled back clean car standards nationally, something that even some automakers are opposed to. So there's petitions here as well. There is a Sierra Club response that you can read about the clean car standards. I know Tara, she's still on, wrote a great op-ed about this a couple weeks ago. So if you are so moved to write a letter about this as well, I would highly encourage you, write to your congressman, write to your senator, let them know that this is not okay. And we're going to do our last activity here and close things out. Folks want to turn to slide 53. This is going to be a little bit of an experiment as well. If folks want to just name one activity they're going to do after they leave this presentation today, I'm going to come out of here. I'll model it. You can take one of these, write your name on it. That's not how you spell my name. And move it to whichever area that you want to do. I'm going to do both of these, so I'm going to put it right between. But if folks want to agree to take action, we can have some visualization of the small actions we're doing today by filling out our names and putting them on the correct categories. And you know what? If you want to do your own action and you want to note that somewhere, go to town. I'm not going to stop you.
Jacob, while folks are filling that out, do you want to speak to the effectiveness of signing petitions as a tactic?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I don't think petition signing is tremendously effective. I think that the best thing to do is contact your politicians directly. And I welcome folks who want to take the content of those petitions, copy and paste it into an email, or make a phone call with it in front of them and reach out directly. That's always more effective. I share the petitions today just in the spirit of taking quick action in support of some of these important policies. If folks want to get involved with some more meaty organizing, I would suggest joining us on our Wednesday calls. We'll take almost the same amount of time I spent going through this whole presentation to talk about all the opportunities to get involved. And I will send an email out about with the information for the Wednesday calls. So those are every week from at 1 and at 5 p.m.
Jacob,
sorry?
I was going to say, do you want to let folks know how to sign up for Sierra Club action alerts?
Oh, great suggestion. There might be something on the next slide here. So I think what I will do for that is I will also put that in a follow-up email. I do have a very handy link if folks want to sign up. So you'll get the latest stuff. If you also want to join our main volunteer list, like if you want to be a recurring volunteer with Sierra Club, there's a way to do that as well. I know some folks probably are involved with other organizations, which is great. I encourage whatever you want to do is awesome. But the email I'm going to send is going to include information on our Wednesday calls, a way to sign up for our mailing list, and then information on all three of these actions, plus the slide deck. And if I can figure out how, a recording of this slideshow. So you can have a lot to look at. I see a question from Lauren. If you contact your representative about Weymouth, looking for talking points, I would look at the petition itself. If you feel like you need more talking points after that, please reach out to me. But I think what's in there is really, really good context. I have the petition right here. I can bring it up on the screen. So if you go and the top and click read more, it gives you a lot of information about it right here. There's also a website called nocompressor.com that has more talking points than you could ever read. The local folks have done a really great job putting information together, and I'll have the latest information as well. All right, we are just a few minutes over time. So I'm going to stay on for a little bit here, and if folks want to chat, feel free. If folks want to go on to the rest of their day, I completely understand. I really appreciate everyone's attentiveness, participation, and willingness to help us play around these activities. And next time, Steve, we will do breakout groups, I promise.